Attention! Are you a healthcare provider? If so, you can earn continuous professional development points accredited by the Health Professions Council of South Africa by watching a different version of this episode. To get your points, click on the link in the show notes below or go to aurorabcounseling.com. That's AURORABCOUNSELLING.com and search for an introduction to intersectional psychology. If you don't need points, then welcome and let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to Intersectional Psychology, the podcast that explores psychology's role in promoting social justice. I'm your host, Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are well wherever you are in the world and that you are tapping into the resources around you to take care of your mental health. This is our very first full-length episode of the podcast, and it has been a long time in the making. A friend and mentor of mine, clinical psychologist Jeannie Covey, taught me the importance of creating mutual context, which is basically a shared understanding of the time and the space that we will be spending together. Or, if you prefer, the rules of the game. If you and I are playing by different rules, then we're not going to communicate effectively and we're not going to understand each other. Now, this scenario is a little bit different because it's not a webinar or a session where I can get immediate feedback from you about where you're at or what you're hoping to get out of the podcast. But I can hopefully help you set expectations for what the podcast is offering. And of course, if you do have any feedback, you are welcome to send it to me. I love talking about all of this stuff, which is why I started a podcast. So send me your feedback and I will incorporate it into future episodes. So the first 4 episodes of the podcast will form a series called Dissecting Intersectional Psychology, which will basically be a starter pack to create shared context, so that we are both playing by the same rules and using the same language going forward in the podcast. So today we are talking about intersectionality and how it applies to psychology. The next episode will be about social justice in the context of psychology. The third episode will answer the question, is it even the place of psychology to promote social justice and address intersectionality? And then the final episode in the series will discuss what a model of intersectional psychology should actually look like. Once a month, I will also post a guided mindfulness or relaxation practice. Because I don't know about you, but these days I need all the help I can get to relax. But back to today. This episode is going to be kind of a beginner's intro into the origins and development of intersectionality, what we really mean when we talk about intersectionality, and how it is going to provide a platform for us to look at a variety of mental health issues through a social justice lens in the future. So come on in and we'll get started. What is intersectionality really about? Ever felt like you didn't fit neatly into a box? Welcome to the human experience. I sound like I'm making an infomercial. Psychology loves categories. It loves to put us in boxes, to label us, to diagnose us. But life is messy. Intersectionality helps us to embrace and navigate that mess while making psychology more just and effective. You've probably heard the term intersectionality before, but it's not just a trendy word to sprinkle into your Instagram captions like salt in your soup or sugar on your cereal. It's a revolutionary framework with roots in the lived experiences of marginalized communities, particularly Black women. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term in 1989 to describe how racism and sexism interact to create unique forms of disadvantage for Black women. But Black feminists had been highlighting these overlapping oppressions for centuries. From Sojourner Truth to the ANC Women's League, from Maria W. Stewart to Pumla Dineo Gaqola. So how does it work? Well, intersectionality reminds us that no one is defined by a single label. It's not just Black or woman or queer or disabled. It's the dynamic interplay of these identities within systems of power. Imagine the nervous system as a highway connecting the brain to the body. Incidents of trauma are like accidents clogging up that highway, and mental health care should be regulating and freeing up that highway. But now imagine an intersection on that highway, where there are multiple lanes converging, with traffic coming in from all directions. Each lane represents a different axis of oppression or privilege: race, gender, class, sexuality. When these intersect, the outcomes aren't just additive, they're compounded. We all know people don't behave logically during rush hour in clogged up traffic. Every incident of racism, sexism, classism, or queerphobia is a capsule of trauma that represents another car at the intersection. It's not racism plus sexism plus classism, it's how these factors are exacerbating each other. Honking their horns at each other, shouting out the windows, if you will. How are the mental health effects of racism interacting with the mental health effects of sexism, for example? The more cause of oppression there are that converge into one identity or one person, the more congested the traffic is going to be. The more stress is going to be crammed into that nervous system. So those are the lanes of oppression. But every lane of power, like being white or male or wealthy or cisgender or straight, is an off-ramp that gets you out of the traffic jam and allows your nervous system to move more freely. In 2020, Elizabeth Cole discussed the concept of intersectional invisibility, which highlights that a person holding two marginalized statuses, for example, women of color, that person is not viewed as representative of either group and is therefore overlooked by dominant group members. For example, I am both an amputee and a transgender woman. So when I am with other amputees, I'm less likely to be seen as representative of that group because my transness sets me apart. Whereas when I'm in a group of trans people, I may be rendered invisible due to my disability. Many people, when they meet me, the first thing they see is the wheelchair, so they don't even clock anything else about me. This phenomenon of intersectional invisibility is usually discussed in the context of our natural human tendency to use prototypes. But it is also grounded in power dynamics. As Cole puts it, the socially dominant group will often have the power to define its in-group norms as the standard for society as a whole. Since white people have been the socially dominant group in the modern Western context, whiteness tends to define the societal norm in most Western nations. In 2016, Patricia Hill Collins and Sirma Bilge consolidated the core principles of intersectionality, which are going to serve as our guideposts for adopting an intersectional lens. These are social inequality, power, relationality, context, complexity, and justice. Now let's look at each of these in a bit more depth. Firstly, social inequality invites us to ask who benefits and who doesn't. Inequality isn't a cosmic accident, it's a meticulously crafted system. Whether we're talking about healthcare, education, or even who gets to feel safe walking down the street, some folks are born with these securities as a given, while others never gain access to them their whole lives. And sadly, the barriers between the most privileged and the least privileged remain very difficult to cross. Intersectionality challenges us to look beyond the obvious and interrogate who benefits and how these benefits are distributed. Think of it this way. If life were Monopoly, it would be very boring. But if life was a game of Monopoly, then some players are handed extra cash and hotels before the game even begins. And the others, they're given properties with higher rents, fewer utilities, and a set of dice that are loaded against them. Intersectionality asks us, why is this board rigged and how do we flip it? Power is the invisible puppeteer. So let's talk about power, the kind you don't see but feel in every aspect of life. Power decides who gets heard, who gets silenced, and who gets to decide the rules of the game. Spoiler alert, it's not always the loudest voice in the room. It's often the one who owns the room, so no one else even stands a chance. For example, in workplaces, women of color are often overlooked for promotions, not because they lack talent, but because power structures weren't designed with them in mind. Look at Donald Trump and Elon Musk right now, literally erasing all diversity from governmental workplaces. And let's not forget how power operates in counseling rooms. If your client fears being judged because of their accent, their skin color, or sexuality, that's power at play. Even if a counsellor doesn't hold any biases or prejudices against aspects of their client's identity, if the client fears that because of their experiences with other people like the counsellor, then there is already a huge power differential. So don't take it for granted that someone else is going to assume you don't have any biases, because they can't take their safety for granted when going into any unfamiliar situation. Intersectionality forces us to ask who's in control and how do we redistribute that more equitably. A good place to start is making the implicit explicit by asking clients or people directly. How does it feel being a black person with a white counsellor? How does it feel being a queer person with a straight counsellor? When are you most aware of your gender setting you apart from others? Thirdly, relationality. Our experiences are interconnected. Your struggle and your liberation is not isolated from mine, and the more we act like it is, the longer oppression will thrive. Intersectionality embraces relationality, reminding us that inequalities don't operate in silos. Picture this. You're in a boat with a bunch of people. Some are rowing with oars, some have holes in their seats, and a few are trying to row with their hands. Intersectionality says, look, we're all in this boat together. We're all going to sink or swim or float together. So maybe it's time we redistribute those oars and patch those holes together.
Come on, girls. Grab an oar. Let's go.
It's about solidarity, not saviorism. Helping because we're connected, not because it makes us feel good. Although it does also make us feel good. Fourthly, context. History, politics, and culture matter, even in psychology. At the time of recording, Donald Trump has been the President of the United States of America for 2 months, for the second time. This time he was very blatantly assisted by a swath of billionaires, most notably South African-born Elon Musk. See, there's relationality again. As a South African, by virtue of my nationality, I am connected to Elon Musk, as much as I wish it weren't true. And in the eyes of many Americans, as a white South African, Elon Musk's actions reflect on me, even though I've never met the man and have no desire to do so. But let's get back to context. Since his first day in office, Donald Trump has already signed hundreds of executive orders that are demonstrably changing the lives of many people in America and around the world. Trump shut down all PEPFAR and USAID funding to South Africa and many other countries in Africa and the developing world. Now, tens of millions of people have no access to the life-saving HIV, TB, gender-affirming, and sexual and reproductive health care they need to survive. That impacts not only their own mental health, but also the mental health of all of those around them and supporting them. The South African government is figuring out an alternative solution for our people, with many of those patients being transferred to their local state clinics. But it will come at the cost of other things the government needs to fund. And what about all of those other countries in Africa and the developing world that are barely managing to stay afloat even when they were receiving aid? Aid that was necessitated by centuries of exploitation from Western countries. And in the meantime, all these patients, even in South Africa, are going to be stressing about where and when and how they are going to get their medications. Even with our government coming up with another plan, there are people in rural areas with very limited access to information. Will they be able to find out how to access their care before their health is irreparably harmed? Intersectionality asks us to think about all of these factors and take our responsibilities as healthcare providers or as human beings seriously, and to advocate for the weakest among us. But intersectionality doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach. It recognizes that history, politics, and culture shape every experience. What works in one context might fail spectacularly in another. We have to adapt our approach to the context and the people to which it applies. Take the feminist movement, for example. While equal pay for equal work is vital, it means something very different for a white, middle-class woman in the corporate world than for an undocumented immigrant of color cleaning hotel rooms. Intersectionality reminds us that context matters, honey, and it urges us to tailor our actions to the realities that people face. Fifthly, complexity. Life is messy, and intersectionality holds that messiness. Life is full of contradictions and gray areas. Intersectionality helps us to color in those grays. Imagine someone who's both privileged and marginalized. A queer white man who's wealthy but disabled. They might hold power in one context, while in another they are marginalized or othered. Intersectionality says, let's unpack that. It's not about ranking identities, but understanding how they interact to create unique experiences. Complexity isn't a bug, it's a feature. So in working with a queer, educated Black woman, we don't only think about how her queerness affects her life, or how her gender affects her life, or how her race affects her life. We think about all of those dimensions and how they complicate each other. When she visits her family in the township, she has to be mindful of her safety as a woman and as queer, and even more as a queer woman. When she's on the university campus, those concerns might be a bit less prominent. But on campus, it might be her race or ethnicity that makes her feel more othered and marginalized. Or think about a conventionally attractive blonde white woman. On the surface, we might think she has everything going for her. But meanwhile, everywhere she goes, she is treated like a poppy, a doll, a bimbo, and an airhead. And so she carries the fear of that expectation into every situation, doubting herself and wondering if anyone is going to respect her ideas and her voice. Sixthly, justice. Intersectionality isn't just about understanding the world, it's about changing it. Think of justice as the engine driving the intersectionality car. It's not enough to recognize injustice, we have to challenge it. Whether that's advocating for policy change, amplifying marginalized voices, or rethinking how we approach counseling, intersectionality demands that we do something. As Kimberly Crenshaw puts it, it's not identity politics on steroids, it's a tool for dismantling inequality. Think about Sojourner Truth's famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" in 1851. Truth demanded recognition as both black and a woman, in a world that denied her the full humanity of either. Intersectionality continues this demand, urging us to see the full picture of human experience. Why psychology needs intersectionality. Let's be honest, psychology hasn't always done a great job representing diverse experiences. Historically, it's been dominated by white, male, cisgender perspectives, leading to theories and practices that often exclude or pathologize marginalized groups. Ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's a lovely theory, but it's rooted in Western individualistic values. How might it look different if it were informed by indigenous and collectivist perspectives? Shin and colleagues in 2017 revealed that only 40 out of 6,700 articles in major counseling psychology journals over a period of 15 years explicitly focused on intersectionality. That's less than 1%. This neglect isn't just an academic oversight, it has real consequences for how we understand and support people. Consider, for example, mental health disparities. Queer women face unique stressors from the intersection of homophobia and sexism, leading to higher rates of conditions like depression and anxiety. But standard therapeutic models often fail to address these intersecting factors. A black woman experiencing workplace discrimination isn't just dealing with stress, she is navigating systemic racism and sexism that shape her mental health. Without intersectionality, psychology risks falling into the silo effect. We study race, gender, and class in isolation as if they don't interact. Intersectionality demands that we look at the full complexity of human experience, challenging us to ask better questions and design more inclusive practices. Intersectionality in practice. So, how do we apply intersectionality in real-world psychology? Let's explore 3 areas: counseling, research, and education. Counseling. Imagine you're a counselor working with a queer immigrant woman with a disability. Intersectionality asks you to see the whole person, not just their queerness, their immigrant status, or their disability, but how these identities interact to shape their experiences. Maybe this client faces barriers to accessing healthcare due to both ableism and xenophobia. Maybe she has trouble getting to a healthcare provider due to her disability. Maybe once she expended most of her energy to reach the clinic or the practice, the receptionist or the nursing staff treat her with disdain or carelessness because she is an immigrant. By the time she finally gets to see the doctor or the counselor, she has experienced even more trauma just in order to get help. Your role isn't just to provide individual support, but also to understand and challenge the systemic factors impacting her life. An intersectional approach also means examining your own biases. Are you unconsciously prioritizing certain aspects of a client's identity over others? For instance, focusing solely on their queerness might overlook how racism shapes their experiences, and hence their presenting complaint. Or how queerness is perceived in their particular culture. Second area, research. When looking at research, Elizabeth Cole's 3-question framework offers a practical guide for incorporating intersectionality into research. Her first question is, who is included within this category? When studying women, are you only including white, middle-class participants? And if you don't have access to women of other demographics, which is fine, if you don't have access, you don't have access, but are you at least considering what impact that is going to have on your research? Are you framing that in your research and in the conclusions and recommendations you make? Cole's second question is, what role does inequality play? How do systems like racism and sexism shape the experiences that you're studying? Her third question is, what similarities exist across categories? For example, what can we learn by comparing the parenting strategies of Black and brown families in addressing systemic racism? And I would add a fourth question. How are you treating the people included in your research? Are they your subjects? Or are they participants and co-creators of the research outcomes? As Crenshaw and Grzanka pointed out in 2014, without intersectionality, research risks perpetuating the very inequities it seeks to address. So, if it doesn't critique systems of power, it's not intersectionality. It's just diversity on autopilot, checking the boxes. Thirdly, education. In education, teaching intersectionality means moving beyond surface-level diversity training. It's about helping students and professionals understand both privilege and oppression. For example, a white, cisgender male psychology student might need to grapple with his own privilege and how it shapes his understanding of mental health. Conversely, a student from a marginalized background might need tools to navigate the systemic barriers they'll encounter in the field. Because even working in the healthcare sector, they might have a sexist boss, or a racist colleague, or a transphobic job interviewer. Or they might end up working in a hospital that is adapted for wheelchair-using clients, but not disabled staff. I have actually been to a hospital in my wheelchair where my psychiatrist needed to come down and find a dingy, unused room for us to meet in because there was no wheelchair access to her office. Because whoever designed the hospital, literally the place that provides healthcare, couldn't conceive that a disabled person might need mental health care in addition to physical health care. I could get to the orthopedics and physiotherapy departments, but not to psychiatric and mental health care. And what if I, a wheelchair-using counselor, had gotten a job in that hospital? Where would they have put me? In the supply closets? Honey. And can you guess what would have avoided that major design flaw? Having an intersectional lens. But bringing it all back, the key here is nuance. Intersectionality isn't about guilt or blame. It's about awareness and action. Challenges and pushback. Let's talk about the backlash. Some people say intersectionality is too complicated, or it's just a buzzword, or it's DEI, as if that's a bad thing. To them, I say, girl, if understanding human complexity is too hard, psychology might not be your field. There's also a tendency to co-opt intersectionality, turning it into a box-ticking exercise. This is what scholars like Cole, Brewster, and Molina call weak intersectionality, acknowledging multiple identities without critiquing the systems of power that shape them. For example, a company might celebrate having a diverse workforce, while ignoring the wage gaps that exist between people of different genders and races, ignoring the discriminatory practices that persist within their organization. Intersectionality fatigue is another challenge. People, especially those in privileged positions, get tired of being asked to examine their biases. But discomfort is a sign of growth. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. And those biases that people are tired of examining are meanwhile actively tiring out and creating obstacles for the marginalized targets of the biases. Also, let's address the academic appropriation of intersectionality. I just want to re-emphasize Cole's point that too often it's treated as a trendy concept divorced from its radical roots in Black feminist activism. Intersectionality isn't just about recognizing diversity, it's about dismantling oppression. And if we take their work without crediting the Black feminists who pioneered this field, then we are simply perpetuating and compounding the centuries of labor that has been stolen from them. That's why Elizabeth Cole introduced the concept of responsible stewardship, for those of us who are less marginalized to practice intersectionality while respecting and acknowledging its roots. And part of the pushback is often because the people who have always held the most power, traditionally white, cisgender, heterosexual men, have fostered this scarcity mindset in which if marginalized people are given more resources or more power, then it means there won't be enough left for them, the people who always have had the power. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's what this idea of intersectionality and liberation is all about. Changing the system that ensures there can only be so many jobs and only so many resources to go around. It's about realizing that each of us can only truly thrive without fear of lack if we all thrive. Because if no one needs anything more, then we don't have to fear them taking stuff away from us. Think about the climate crisis. The planet is getting warmer whether we acknowledge it or not. But all of these energy companies who have used Trump's presidency as an excuse to abandon their moves towards renewable energy sources and have dug further into fossil fuels. Their multi-millionaire leaders like Andrew Mackenzie and Wael Sawan of Shell, Patrick Pouyanné of Total Energies, Murray Auchincloss of BP, Mike Wirth of Chevron, and no, I'm not even going to mention Darren Woods of ExxonMobil because they've never even pretended to acknowledge that the climate crisis is real. But these leaders might be making themselves and their shareholders richer right now, but how long before their own regions become unlivable too? And this matters to us as healthcare workers, especially in South Africa, because which places are being worst affected by the climate crisis? Island nations and sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, the most marginalized people in these communities are currently bearing the brunt of the crisis because they have less secure housing and are less able to insulate themselves against the heat and the cold and the extreme weather events. But very, very soon, even the most privileged among us will pay the price unless we hold accountable those who are most able to change the course of the climate catastrophe. Many homes in California are already uninsurable due to the frequency and the intensity of the wildfires there. And sure, those are among the most wealthy people on the planet. But if their homes burn down and are uninsured, then they lose that value completely. Not to mention the feeling of safety, security, and belonging that comes from a home shared with family. They don't get reimbursed for that. How long before the homes in our wealthiest neighborhoods are also uninsurable due to frequent and extreme weather conditions? How do all of these concerns, not to mention the concern for the future of our children, impact our clients' mental health? So, here are some common complaints against intersectionality and how to respond to each of them. Firstly, intersectionality is just identity politics on steroids. Reality check, it's about analyzing power, not making anyone a victim. It's too complicated. Reality check, so is human experience. Get used to it. Complaint? Psychology should be neutral. Reality check? Science isn't neutral. It reflects who funds it and conducts it, and their own value systems. And this has real-world consequences for real-life people. Have you ever seen that illustration that depicts the difference between equality and equity? If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put the image on the screen, but I'll also include it on the website with a link in the show notes. But I'm going to describe it as well. So it depicts three people trying to watch a sporting event, but they are all standing behind a fence. Each person is of a different height. So in this situation, the tallest person obviously has an advantage because they can see over the fence most easily. Equality means giving each person exactly the same size box to stand on in order to see over the fence. And even with this box, the shortest person is still unable to see over the fence. But it's fine, right? Because it's equal. Everyone gets the same. On the other hand, equity means giving each person what they need in order to participate at the same level. So the tallest person isn't given a box at all because they don't need it. The person of medium height is given one box because that's all they need in order to see. And the shortest person is given 3 boxes because that is what they need in order to be on the same level as the others. Now, the third window in this illustration doesn't show equality or equity. Instead, it shows what is often the reality, where the tallest person with the most advantage is given 6 boxes. The person of medium height is given 1 box, and the shortest person is not given any boxes. In fact, they are stuck in a ditch. And a perfect example for this is what's been happening recently with the re-election of Donald Trump. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, has been given free rein to gut the governmental departments that award contracts to his own companies. And under his influence, Trump has stopped all PEPFAR and USAID payments to projects in the developing world. He has bullied vulnerable countries like Ukraine and Palestine. He has threatened less powerful countries like Greenland with invasion. He's bombed resisting countries like Yemen, Syria, and Palestine. Not to mention taking away the rights of marginalized people in his own country. At what point do our leaders say enough? Now, there is an alternative version of that equality versus equity illustration. On this version, the reality window is replaced by a liberation window. In this window, none of the spectators need any boxes or aids to overcome their challenges, because there is no fence blocking the spectator's view. In other words, the systemic barriers that created those challenges in the first place have been removed. And that is the point of intersectional, liberatory, and social justice psychology. Moving forward, to transform psychology. how do we ensure that intersectionality isn't just a buzzword, but a transformative force in psychology? Here are 3 actionable steps. Start with advocacy and policy. Intersectionality must inform everything from curriculum design to healthcare policies, whether that's policy at a governmental level, provincial level, or even at the level of your own organization. A colleague of mine recently advertised a counseling room for rent. I inquired if it was still available, and he said, "Yes, but it's on the 2nd floor and there's no lift." So I, as a wheelchair-using counselor, wouldn't be able to use it. Nor would any potential client who uses assistive devices. Don't you think that's an important aspect to include in the advertisement? And I'm not blaming my colleague. For him and for most people, that consideration is so outside their frame of reference that they never consider it. I probably wouldn't have considered it before I lost my legs. But why aren't we all taught to think about how our world is structured for some people and not others? Shouldn't that be a consideration in our counseling practice? And maybe if we were more aware, then those barriers wouldn't have been created in the first place. I mean, all of us will hopefully live long and full lives, which means even the fittest among us is eventually going to have some mobility challenges. This means pushing for systemic changes, like mandatory training in intersectionality for mental health professionals and increased funding for research with marginalized communities. Next, learn the importance of coalition building. Intersectionality isn't just about highlighting differences. It's about finding common ground. The reproductive justice movement is a great example. Founded by women of color, it unites diverse voices to address issues like abortion access, childcare, and systemic racism. Psychology can learn from this model by fostering coalitions that challenge systemic barriers. I recently attended a protest calling for the boycott, divestment, and sanctioning of Israel for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. The protest was organized by a diverse coalition of activist groups, including Palestine Solidarity Campaign, South African Jews for a Free Palestine, Healthcare Workers for Palestine, Queers for Palestine, Christians for Palestine, Cape Town Lesbians, and various local mosques. Many of these groups are very small, and there are even fewer members of these groups who would actually participate in a protest and go out and march in the sweltering heat of an African summer. But when we all came together, we formed a coalition of thousands of people, both in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. Finally, we need to hold ourselves accountable. This means engaging with intersectionality's roots, reading the original texts, amplifying marginalized voices, and continually interrogating our own practices. As Patricia Hill Collins reminds us, intersectionality is not about being inclusive for its own sake. It's about analyzing and challenging systems of power. So, intersectionality is not just a box to tick or a flavor of the month. It's a lens, a tool, and a call to action. It challenges us to see people in their full complexity and to fight for a world where that complexity is celebrated, not erased or diminished. Intersectionality isn't about making psychology woke. It's about making it accurate, just, and relevant. So the next time you hear someone dismiss intersectionality as too political or too complicated, remind them. People's lives are complex, and psychology should be too. Thanks again for being here. This is a subject very close to my heart, and I clearly enjoy talking about it. So if you have any thoughts or questions or challenges or spicy takes on anything I've said, please reach out to me at Intersectional Psychology everywhere except Twitter. Before I sign off for today, I also just want to say that I will never be including any third-party ads on Intersectional Psychology, which is great because it means that you can be sure all the information shared here is free from corporate influence and bias. However, it also means that this podcast will only be made possible by support from you, the listener. So if you enjoy this podcast or find value in it, please consider joining my Patreon for as little as $3 per month. And also, I will be following the lead of Caitlin Durante and Jamie Loftus of the Bechdel Cast podcast, and henceforth referring to Patreon as Matreon, because honestly, why are we still naming things after the literal patriarchy in 2025? Your contributions on the Matreon will be used to improve this podcast, to cover the production costs, to research, write, edit, and record each episode, and to host our guests. In return, you'll get exclusive Matreon benefits like bonus episodes, additional guided mindfulness recordings, group discussions, and more. Next week, we're going to take a closer look at the concept of social justice in psychology. And once we've covered this first series of 4 episodes, we'll start inviting guests onto the podcast and look at more real-world applications of intersectional psychology. So, thank you for starting this journey with me. I hope you come a long way with me, and look after yourself. I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectionalpsychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectionalpsychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsych.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology, but mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Cite Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health